Welcome to Flying Upstream, the podcast where we uncover the choices, practices, and wisdom that defy mainstream conventions. I'm Kristen.
And I'm Louisa, and together we're here to illuminate the alternative paths that have shaped human experiences through the ages. In each episode, we'll examine ways to move beyond societal norms. We're passionate about how timeless wisdom and unique lifestyle choices can foster healthier, sustainable, and enriching lives. Free spirits, welcome back to another episode of Flying Upstream, where we dare to defy the norm. Join us today as we explore the unique perspective and discover how it can impact our lives in profound ways. Whether you are looking to challenge the status quo, to embrace a different lifestyle, or simply gain new insight, this episode is for you. So let's dive in and discover the beauty and wisdom that lies beyond the mainstream. And for those of you who are not here with us on a regular basis, don't forget to follow and subscribe. And we're going to jump right in because today we have a wonderful guest, Dr. Garrett Goggans. Dr. Goggans is the founder of Triumphant Movement, a powerful initiative aimed at inspiring and empowering individuals through real life stories of overcoming challenges and achieving remarkable success. As the driving force behind the book titled Triumphant Stories of Inspiration, Empowerment, and Success, Dr. Goggans has brought together 18 authors to share their journeys, offering invaluable insights and motivation. With his extensive background in coaching and personal development, Dr. Goggans is dedicated to helping others find their voice, organize their thoughts, and share their impactful stories. We are excited to explore the world of resilience and inspiration today with Dr. Goggans. Dr. Goggans, welcome to the Flying Upstream podcast.
Hey, thank you. So happy to be here. Thank you so much.
Of course, we're so excited to have you. Actually, for our usual listeners and for you, Dr. Goggans, you may not know, I have a co host. Her name is Kristen. She's not here today. She wasn't able to join us today. Let's get started. Let's start at the beginning. I always love to be able to understand the beginning of someone's journey. What was the beginning of your life like? What were the childhood moments that most impacted who you are today?
For me, actually, my journey always has to go back that far. Maybe not to complete childhood, but definitely when I was a teenager. When I was 16, I ran away from home and I dropped out of high school. I was really running from religion more than anything. I grew up in a very religious household, and I'm not going to say whether that's good or bad. It was just not something that was for me as a teenager. I was very much a kid that had to experience things for myself. You could tell me all day long, this is bad, this is good. I needed to experience and find out the whys behind things. And I did make this audacious choice to run away from home and go experience the world in a way that taught me a lot of lessons. The cool thing about that, though, was that I was very ambitious, even as a 16-year-old. So I was working two full-time jobs. I wasn't just a typical runaway. I was really doing things to try to make myself be successful in some form or fashion. But even with that, at 16 years old, my maturity level did not match my ambition level. So there was a lot of poor choices that were made in that aspect. But I was able to, through having a really deep conversation with my father, turned some things around, went back to school, and obviously I ended up getting a doctorate in computer science. So I think people think with my doctorate it's the PhD. It's not. It's really computer science. And what that has to do with coaching and all that was just a whole bunch of times in my life where I always hit rock bottom. We all go there. We think our lows are the extreme lows, and my highs were extreme highs. But after getting divorced and losing jobs within 6 months of each other twice, so that happened, and then it happened again. I was really, why do I keep finding myself in this situation? Why am I always seeing this rock bottom state? And that's really where personal development, I call it personal discovery, because there were some things that I needed to find out about myself, who I wanted to be, who I currently was, and all those little nuances in the middle that needed to change to get me to where I wanted to go. And it was really through this journey of running away from home, dealing with some of the guilt that I had that I put my family through, and discovering all these pieces that I had to let go of, all this imposter syndrome that I had built up because of this statistic of, oh, you're a runaway, you're not going to really amount to anything. But I had a doctorate. And so it was a lot of stuff that I had to work through that really got me on this journey of coaching and that personal development. That's really quick from kid to adult where I was and what got me into that personal discovery journey.
Just like you mentioned, generally speaking, we have this perception, right? When we think of a 16-year-old kid who ran away from home, we just outline the rest of what that path looks like. We're like, that is a failure. Moms, friends, and parents everywhere are like, do not hang out with that kid. You want nothing. Kid is going to drive you down the wrong path. So I'd love to talk a little bit about that, because I think that story in itself really just defies the odds. You clearly defied the odds, very clearly. What was this sort of chip on your shoulder from that 16-year-old to the person that eventually got that PhD? What kind of kept you going?
It's an interesting question. And I don't know that I have a very specific answer to that. In that time when I did the runaway, I met my best friend. I was 16 and we're still best friends. My kids call him Uncle Steve. But during that time, we wanted something very specific out of life. And we did things to, I hate to use the term chase, but I'm going to use it because at 16, that's what I was doing. I was chasing some dream. And I didn't necessarily know what that looked like, but we would have all these late night conversations, my friend and I, just about where we wanted to go in life. And I found later on in life that what I was doing was really putting this concept, this A level, C level type goal of something that I didn't know how I was going to reach it. I just knew I wanted to reach it. And this concept of I was going to get there or I was going to die trying. And we both were in that state. And we shifted through a whole bunch of things. Like my first career was actually in architecture. So I was designing houses, doing all kinds of fun stuff with that. Wasn't getting me to where I wanted to go. So I was like, okay, where's my shift? Where's my pivot? What do I do next? And that got me into computer science. Really enjoyed the programming aspect. Still was not hitting that purpose or that passion. And so I was looking for that thing. Like, what is that thing that's going to drive me, that really is going to get me to where I want to be? And it wasn't until I hit these rock bottom states. And so this is really from that to here, the chip was there was a training event that I went to where the keynote speaker said this statement that just stuck with me. She said that any success you find in life or don't find in life has nothing to do with external circumstances or other people, but has everything to do with you. And I had no idea what she was talking about. I was like, man, that's harsh. What are you trying to say there? Because I'm in all these circumstances now, divorces, losing jobs, and these are circumstances that I had no control over. And so I was at first a little bitter, a little taken aback, but the more that sat with me, I was like, okay, if that's true, then what is it about me? And this is where the discovery piece really came in, was what is it about me that needs to change, that needs to shift? What is that? And that's where that ship really it started there, because I was going through all these different little things. But when you get into personal discovery, personal development, and you start understanding these mindset principles and all these other little aspects, you start reading books like What's Your Personal Narrative? One of my favorite books in the world is What to Say When You Talk to Yourself, from, who was his name, Dr. Shad Helmstetter. And that narrative, these things that we say about ourselves, I'm a runaway, I'm worthless, I'm this, I'm that, that really puts a label on us. So once you start getting into this idea where you can shift the narrative, shift the vision, shift all these things, it becomes extremely addictive for more growth and more growth. And so that shift really became this idea of from one level to the next. How do I keep leveling up? Or how do I level up again? And really understanding that even though I had this doctorate, the success wasn't the doctorate, right? I didn't feel successful, but that's because I was telling myself the wrong narrative. And so the chip became, what's the right narrative? Who do I want to be? And you can define that and you can create that. And that's the journey. And that just becomes such a mission in life. And so that really was more of the chip than anything.
I love what you shared about leveling up, because it made me think of something that I, until this moment when you just shared that, had not actually even considered. But we talk about leveling up And as a society, I think in general, we think about leveling up status, right? Whether socioeconomic status or whatever it is. But what it made me think of leveling up when you shared that was internal, leveling up internally. And that is something that until I started in my own internal journey, and the same journey that you had, realizing the work is within. It is within where the level up needs to occur, because then it is going to show up in the external world when I feel it within. What does that look like? I know you coach and I know you work with a lot of people, and it is your goal and your mission to help people be able to do this. What does that look like for somebody who's never experienced that, or for somebody who doesn't know if they've experienced that? What does internal level up look like for someone?
Everybody's different. And so, even in coaching and when you're working with people, that level up is we always look for this huge leap, right? And for me, a level up is just I'm 1% better than I was yesterday. And that's a level up. And to celebrate the crap out of that, right? Because we always look for these huge jumps, these huge shifts, these huge changes. And for me, it was really this idea if I can stop looking in the mirror and telling myself that I was unworthy and it feel comfortable to do that, because we look at mirror work and you look at yourself in the mirror and you say, "Oh, Garrett, I love you," and you're, oh, it's such an uncomfortable feeling. If I can look at myself and say, Garrett, you're worthy, and it not be uncomfortable, that's a level up. You just got yourself to a place where you can start to feel something different within inside you and celebrate that. Those little pieces, those little successes, that's really the most important aspect of leveling up. And it's always just 1%. Just be 1% better than you were yesterday. And you hear all these motivational sayings, right? I'm not in competition with anybody except for myself. I just want to be better than I was yesterday. And when you can start to recognize those little shifts in who you are, and let's really get something straight. Like it is a who you are aspect. We look at things, say, I want this, and one of my favorite speakers in the world who's no longer with us is Dr. Wayne Dyer. And he used to say, we don't attract the things that we want, we attract who we are. And this really speaks to what you just said. Everything is internal. So if I can elevate myself 1%, then the things that are coming back to me are going to be 1% greater. And you appreciate things differently because you're appreciating every aspect of the life. And the journey, I always tell people too, there's this saying, it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. We want the destination because we have to figure out who I have to be to achieve that. But when you're going through that shift of who you are, it's the journey that becomes more memorable. You'll hit your goal and you'll be like, oh, this is cool, but man, how I got here was freaking amazing. And that's how that level up works because every day you can have that growth in the nth degree. And so once you realize that there's shifts that can be made, the healing that can be made inside of you, and you go, oh man, this is so cool. I want more. And then you'll elevate even higher. So it really is just do that 1% aspect. And for me, that's what it was like. And that 1% led to 2, then it went to 10, and understanding that there's speed involved with this. There's another book, U Squared by Price Pritchett. We can do quantum leaps in our growth once we have the belief that we can make those changes. We can have that growth mindset and achieve the things that we want. Once that belief happens, you just start clicking, right? Those 1% happen faster and faster and faster.
It's so true, because at the beginning of my journey, I can speak for myself, I was looking at it as I think a lot of us tend to, like you mentioned, which is looking for these big leaps, these big changes. And because they weren't happening quick enough for me, it was like I was missing all the work that I was doing in the little changes, in the subtle, little everyday things. And it is in those subtle, little, small changes that we transform our lives. I remember the first time that I accomplished a big goal that I had written out on my vision board. I didn't have the feeling that I thought I would had, and that in itself stirred something up in me, because I had been so focused on doing the work that it took to get there and enjoying that. And enjoyment, I want to be clear about this, enjoyment in the sense that I was paying attention to it and I was seeing the gratitude. I was seeing what there was to be grateful for in the experiences, because it's not always joyful. There's a lot of pain that comes with growing internally, because we have to let go of version of ourselves to be able to come into the new versions of ourselves. It was me. I had the power all along. It wasn't the external factors. And so when I think about what you do, every time we've messaged back and forth, one of the things I always remember is on Facebook how you are titled is Triumphant and the name of your book. And I love that. I love that because it takes a lot of confidence to be able to be like, okay, this is how I am identifying right now as a triumphant person. What does that mean to you? What does triumph looks like for you?
It's just those little things. We all like, and I love how you said that because when we go on these journeys and we look at this idea that we always have to be positive and doesn't matter what's going to happen, we have to be positive. And there is a thing like that. The awareness isn't that I have to be positive, is that I look for the positive outcome. And so understanding that crap happens, life is going to throw us some things that are not positive, and we're not going to want to be positive in that moment, but we can look at that and say, okay, I can choose to react the way I always react in those situations, or I can choose to have a different response. I can learn from these things and what do I do and process things differently, right? And that's a positive outcome. So what we do a lot of the times is when negative things happen to us, we suppress it because, oh, I have to be positive. So I suppress all the emotions and all the things that I'm supposed to go through. We have to go through those feelings and those emotions. We have to let that cycle the way it's supposed to cycle. And that's when we can overcome. That's when we can be triumphant over those little things, all the negative things that come into our lives. But if we suppress it, suppression equals depression. So when we're suppressing these emotions, we're not letting them process the way they're supposed to. We get this built up trauma. And then here we are. Right? But then understand that we can go through and process. This is the healing journey. We can process those things later and release the trauma and overcome all these things. We didn't know this. I didn't know this. All the guilt and all these things, this unworthiness, what I did to my family when I ran away from home, I just buried and buried and buried and buried and buried all those things. And when I finally start to go and look at that and process through that, I overcame the guilt. And guilt's a very interesting thing, right? It lets you climb the success ladder and then it pulls you down and it says, you don't deserve that. And so then you're like, okay, I don't deserve that. And in my healing journey, I found out that's why I kept going to this rock bottom state, was because I was self sabotaging because I didn't feel internally, subconsciously, unconsciously that I deserved to have the success that I was going for. So once I could go through that guilt and release that guilt and do the healing journey, then success just became a completely different animal to me. I could see the little things, and that's a whole story of triumph in all of its own. So we go through these things in life, and the stories in the book, they can get pretty intense. Like there are some pretty intense stories that are there from those authors. It doesn't have to be intense. It just has to be intense to us in this moment. And so when we look at the things and say, okay, this is happening and this is crappy, I can come out the other side of this, though. I know I can because I've done it before. I can do it again. Or this person did it. So if they can do it, I can do it. If this person went through that, then I can definitely get through this. And then you overcome those things. You process the things how you're supposed to process it. And you go, oh, wow, I did it. I came out the other side. And that's a triumph. Being triumphant is not a one time and done thing. There's multiple triumphs in our lives. We just have to look at them and celebrate those successes that we were talking about earlier. And that's a triumph. And so we live a life of triumph. We're always triumphant because we always do the things to get us in. I love using the term on the other side, because as you're going through it, you have to go through that and come out the other side. And that there's our triumph. That's living a life of being triumphant.
I absolutely agree. And I love the way that you shared it because being triumphant has always been something that has seemed like a one time thing. I triumphed over that. But it seems like we don't talk about being triumphant in the general sense. And it's not something that flows with us. It's always been static. I think that in the general society, that's how we look at being triumphant. I really appreciate the way that you shared that. And I have two questions about a lot of the things that you just shared because there was so much goodness in there. But first of all, what do you think caused that guilt that you felt that kept pulling you down to rock bottom? Where do you think that guilt came from? Was it just internal? Were there external factors?
It was a little of both. So we look at the runaway story, you have to dig a little bit deeper in that. Once I got past myself and I went through the growth I needed to do and my maturity level started to match my ambition level, I realized a lot of the hurts that I caused to people. And just holding on to those hurts, like I can, to this day, I can remember when I ran away from home, can see my mom coming into, I was working at Wendy's at the place, and I can see her face when she came into Wendy's and begged me to come back home. And that hurt that was there didn't register as the 16-year-old because I knew what I was doing and so on and so forth. But later on in life, that sat with me, and I knew that there was that hurt that was there. Didn't ask for forgiveness on that aspect. We have a really good relationship now, my mother and I, but it took some getting to that point, but understanding what I had done to her, what I had done to other people. And because at 16, I'm doing all kinds of crazy stuff and causing hurts to other people in relationships that I had. So it was just compiling all the things as I was going through and recognizing what I had done in life caused this guilt to go through that. And I didn't understand what guilt was doing for me. For me at that time, guilt was just a part of who I was. And I didn't recognize it till I started going in through this personal discovery, understanding what were the hurts, what were the things that were holding me back. And this is a big, huge piece of people who go through personal development that they miss. There's a healing factor that has to happen, right? That's what we call this. What's the piece in between of who you are now and who you want to be? What are those pieces in between? And a lot of that's trauma, the releasing of things that we have to let go of, or this personal narrative of we've told ourselves that we're not worthy, but why? Understand what that narrative is. What is keeping us from that? And it was in that point in my journey of saying, there's guilt there. There's something there. And so what was it? And so that's really the self-analyzing of these things that were holding me back that uncovered this guilt. And I talk a lot about this, I call it a vision. There was this piece for me that I had to go through, and I started to see what this guilt was, what it was like. But I saw it weird. So I felt like it was this thing that I was trying to expel, but it kept coming back because we have this misconception of things like guilt and all those things that it attaches itself to us. And that's not the truth. What the truth is that we grow so accustomed to having that we don't let it go. Guilt is not here. Those things like guilt are not here to be a part of who we are. It's supposed to be something that we process and release, but we don't release it. So it's not the guilt that's attached to us, we're attached to the guilt. And once you can recognize those things, that's when the guilt can leave. And that's when I released that. So it was really just this personal discovery that I understood what I was doing in my life and that there was this guilt that I was having there. And that's when the forgiveness comes, forgiving myself for what I did. Forgiveness is a huge part of healing. And when we don't do that, we're still holding on to things. Forgiveness is, we can release that now. And so that's what it really was. It was a lot of the internal, but understanding it was the internal because of the external things that I had done.
Mm-hmm.
Long story. Answer your
Yeah.
question in a long way.
I love that. I love the long stories. There's so much power in sharing how you experience that, because one of the reasons that I love doing this podcast is because we can get into these stories and be able to understand that what feels sometimes so different and so unconventional is like somebody else has felt something similar. And even though none of us have the same two experiences, I love that you take the time to explain it thoroughly, because I really do feel like the impact that it has is really a lot more widespread and even more thorough. I feel like when somebody listening can identify with any part of what you said, because then it's let me go and do that personal discovery even further, because the depth to which you just shared that, sometimes we don't all get there on our own. And that's probably a good reason why you do what you do, the coaching. And it's important to have a coach and to have somebody who's walked that path to help us walk that path sometimes when the depth of it has been stalled for whatever reason, because life happens is the main thing here. Something else that you mentioned earlier that I want to get back to when you were talking about the stories and I know that there's 18 authors in your book and there's all different types of stories. One of the things that I wanted to bring up and just see what your take on it is, one of the experiences personally that I had was comparing my story to others. It would always be like their story is worse. They went through worse. And I always use that to lessen my own pain because I would always say they've been through worse. What am I complaining about? I should be okay. And I'd love to hear what you think about that and how that sort of plays out in the stories that are shared in your book.
You are absolutely right. And when Triumphant came into play, Triumphant's really twofold. And so let's really unwrap what Triumphant is. And a lot of it is people have, I'm addicted to people's stories. And I don't think that there's one that's more intense and one that's less intense. A story is a story, and a hurt is a hurt, and a pain is a pain. And in my mind, they're all equal because we, it is what it is. And we assign these values as humans. We'll assign the value of what's more intense, what's that. And yes, some of them get into the fields, pretty hardcore into the fields. But when you're going through things, it's pretty hardcore in the fields. And it's not necessarily when we can come, the idea is not to compare, it's to relate and say, this is the feeling that I was going through. Oh, I have that feeling too. Because the feeling is the secret sauce. That's what we have to overcome is this feeling of pain, this feeling of hurt, the feeling of all this. And it's the vehicle of how we got there is not really the point. It's how are we going to overcome the things that we're going through, and that's the point. And so we look at that, and there's a healthy comparison, so we can say, oh, she went through this or he went through that, and that seems so much more than what I'm going through. So your perspective should shift. The whole idea is not to say that what you're going through is so minimal. It's saying that what you're going through you can't overcome, no matter how minimal or how huge it is. You can't overcome that, and so we have to change the perspective of the comparison and just understand that the whole concept is that we want to stop suppressing or stop going into ourselves so we don't continue the journey that we're going through because the triumph is there. But when we give up and we just say, I'm just going to hold on to this and I'm just going to just wallow in my misery, that's a terrible place to be. We have to change our perspective, say, no, I'm going through this and I can overcome this. I don't have to be here. I can be in a different place, whatever place we want. And so change the perspective of what the stories are. It's not a comparison, it's just saying, hey, we can do this together. It's a community. We're uplifting the saying that rising tide lifts all ships. That's what we're doing. We're letting this tide rise so all of us can rise together. And so just change the perspective on this and understand that it's what you're feeling is okay, and it may seem so minimal, but there is, like I said, there's no minimal, there's no huge. It's a hurt, it's a pain, and we have to go through. We can overcome those pains, no matter what size and our preconceived notion, what size that is. It's let's get through it together, and that's what the triumphant piece is. Taking that because a lot of these people were scared to share their story. So those authors, some of them are going, no one wants to hear what I have to say. And I said, no, everybody wants to hear what you have to say, whether it's huge or if it's small. Someone's going to relate to the feeling that you had. And that's really, I'm going back to the whole point, is that the feeling that you have, when they can relate to the feeling, they can say, I can overcome as well because they did it. So I can too. And that's really what the Triumph is all about, is helping these people get their message out there because they feel compelled to do so. And then this is why we call it Triumphant Movement. So they tell the story, they have a healing aspect that comes from sharing it. So they elevate, right? They level up. And in sharing that, they help somebody else to level up. And so we're moving, everybody's sharing this movement together. And again, long story short, that's really what it's all about. It's not about the size of the event, it's about the feelings that we're going through and that we can overcome those things. And we can, again, experience all the little triumphs that we have in life.
I love that you, with this book, helped people overcome the fear of sharing their stories for exactly the reason that you said, which is the same reason that Kristen and I started this podcast. Is there's so much value in one person's story. There is so much value in what each one of us feels individually that the collective can get out of it. That one feeling that one shared emotion, that one experience that somebody else can identify with can be the one thing that can change someone's lives. And it sounds like you have done that in your book with 18 authors just in that one piece of work. And with the work that you do every day in coaching, I'm sure you do that every single day. And I want to dig into that now. I know that we've talked about you have a background in coaching, and it's very clear that you have a passion for personal development. And today you've shared with us, with the audience, your insights on helping others find their voice, that you organize their stories and you connect them to an audience on a deeper level, right? Can you take us to the exact moment when you realized that helping others find their voice and connect them with their audiences so that they too can make a difference and make an impact, that was something that you'd make a part of your life's journey?
Yeah. In the coaching for me shifted. And it was really, we had talked before we actually went live about, I had done a podcast as well. And then same sort of situation, right? I had this podcast, I was listening to all these people's stories and how they overcame things. It was so inspiring to me. Like I joke, but not really joke, say that I did that podcast for very selfish reasons because every time I got off of that interview, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm fired up, let's go. And so that feeling just kept me moving in my own personal discovery journey. But there were other little aspects too. So I would there I live in Colorado Springs, and there's a speaking event that we put on here. I took over hosting it. It's called Memoirs, and we would go and we would listen to people and just share little aspects of things that they've been through. And again, not huge, not small. They were just whatever you wanted to share, and that started inspiring me. And then through coaching, though, I kept getting introduced to people who had these stories. And I would go, man, you have such a powerful story. Have you thought about writing a book? Have you thought about doing this? Yeah, I thought about it, but who's going to want to hear it? And that was the thing that kept happening. And I was like, everybody does, because I was listening to the feedback of the episodes that I had in my podcast, and oh, that person really resonate with me, and it gave me this permission to go and do the thing that I want to do because now I know I can. And so people were just going through all these things from stories, and everything shifted for me at that point. And so it became this passion, and really defining the purpose was I think one of my superpowers is that I hold so much belief in an individual that they can't help but believe in themselves. And so I know that we can go through these things. And how do I know that? Because I went through it. So it's going through all that aspect is I look at my own story and see if I can do it, you can too. So there's where that belief comes. And under listening to everybody else saying, man, these stories really uplift me or they motivate me or they do something to me that lets me know that I can accomplish the things that I need to accomplish. And so I felt like listening to both sides of these people who want to share them and those people who need them. I need to bridge this gap and get those people connected in some form or fashion. And so that's really where Triumphant ignited from. I didn't know how it was going to work. It was just this thing that came to me like, how do I bridge this gap? How do I get people to be excited about sharing their story and getting on these platforms? Because I feel like that's a calling. Not everybody has that calling to get up on stage or to do those things. But if you're feeling compelled to do that, then that's your purpose. I feel like it's not by accident. Like you're here to help those follow you, right? You're to lead that thing. And so that's really where it just clicked for me one day when I was so addicted to all these people's stories and saying, how do I bridge this gap? And that's where everything shifted. So the coaching shifted to where we are at with Triumphant. And that's just the general where the flow is going right now.
That's really amazing. I know that it takes a lot of courage, as we've talked about, to get out there and to tell your story. And I love everything that you've shared with us today. I know that this is going to make an impact, even if it's just in one person's life. I'm really grateful for you being here today. Is there anything else that you'd like to share before we wrap up for our listeners?
We've been talking about Triumphant. We've been talking about this book, and the book is great, but it's volume one. There's subsequent volumes, and I'm actually taking in people who want to be a part of volume two. So I'm looking for storytellers. I'm looking for those people who want to share that and maybe not know how. Triumphant's very specific for those. There are people out there who are doing it and they don't need that guidance. They don't need this thing. But Triumphant, like I said, is twofold. And so there's mentorships that go with this, with the Triumphant aspect on that back end. But we're looking for volume two authors right now, people who feel compelled to share that story, want to help inspire others, give people and empower people because of what they went through, and help us all find success. You can go to triumphantstories.com. There's a whole place in there for you to reach out to me if you feel like this is something you want to do. And you can all just be a part of the movement. Let's go change the world together.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you for sharing that opportunity with our audience. I hope that our listeners will take advantage of that and go on over to triumphantstories.com and reach out to Dr. Goggans and see if this is your opportunity to tell your story and impact other people's lives and change the world with a story. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Goggans. Your story is remarkable. What you're doing is remarkable. I hope and know that you're going to continue to have great success. And again, thank you for being our guest today on Flying Upstream.
Thank you for having me. It's been so much fun. I love talking to people like you. We're on the same wavelength here, and I love it. So I appreciate just giving me the opportunity.
Of course, thank you.
All right, free spirits, that's all the time we have for today on Flying Upstream.
We hope this episode sparked your curiosity and ignited a desire to explore the extraordinary paths less traveled.
Even when the current feels strong, a whole world of possibilities awaits.
We'll see you next time on the other side of mainstream.
So keep questioning, keep challenging, and most importantly, keep flying upstream.